and we'll give you a notification so you can watch that debate as well. Right, macroeconomics. Right now, we are about to have what I believe to be one of the most important meetings with the most important people that are going to be discussing the structure of the new world order by putting together and understanding the new world that we have found ourselves in. If you have watched previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that I've been talking about how tariffs and sanctions and everything that's happened is driving a desire to weaken the dollar as a strategic goal of America so that they can do a controlled demolition of the apparatus that was propping up the euro dollar and the petrodollar, because they're trying to prevent what we were being driven into, World War III, having known that China would have won because they would have sat on the side while everyone else blew each other up, just like America did, because they had the manufacturing base, the cheap manufacturing base during World War I and World War II. And we were setting up for that. And I believe that there has been a strategic move with the Trump administration to recognize that Biden was taking us down the darkest place, because he would have been fine because he took all the bribes and all the money and everything that's being exposed right now. So who are those important people of the New World Order of 2025, and what does it look like? Well, to analyze that, we need to understand and dive into the macro section, and then I'll go a little bit deeper in the geopolitical section to add a little bit more meat to the bone. So focusing purely on macro and finance and following the money, who are the important people today? Well, Putin, Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia, and Trump in the new vision for the Trump administration and the MAGA movement, and what the new vision for America as a regional power rather than global peace looks like. They are all going to be meeting, and the others that are not invited to that room is for a very important reason. And I'll tell you how I read into it. Remember, don't listen to what they say. Follow the money in order to understand what they do. Then they'll put some stupid narrative in order to fool you. And before you know it, boom, it's happened before your eyes. Okay, so when I follow the money, and again, I'm open to changes as the environment changes, but this is what I see. This is my best thinking today. They're meeting to discuss Ukraine, but it's not about Ukraine. Primarily, they're going to be discussing exactly the macro environment, and they're going to be discussing exactly who out of Saudi Arabia, Russia going through to BRICS, and America is going to be supplying Europe and other regions across the global south and China with the resources that they need, and what that looks like in the 2025 New World Order meeting. That is what this meeting is about. So we need to understand, what do each of these players want? And we can't use the traditional narrative. We need to understand that, look, come on. This was a war between a covert war, a proxy war between America and Europe. Because Europe was getting gas, Germany, the manufacturing base, was getting gas from Russia. So the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline and did a controlled demolition, did regime change across the region, through the lobby groups that they control, primarily the Israeli lobby that has significant influence over European leadership, was able to trick and use media funded by US aid, funded the BBC, funded the Ukraine media, funded the US media, Fox, CNN, millions and millions was exposed as the budget through Associated Press and the propaganda network of the CIA in order to make Europeans believe that they were fighting for democracy. Remember, Zelensky was the result of a CIA coup in 2014 that we're told is Russian propaganda, of course. Of course, there's Russian propaganda as well. But we are here where we are right now because of that operation. Now, Russia resisted against that in order to get more power at the negotiation table, and Russia won against America. But America is still very strategically important. And because we transitioned from the Biden administration, which would have taken us to World War III under Harris, and because Biden, Genocide Joe, and Harris, Holocaust Harris, were doing anything that the Israeli lobby would ask them to do, they were being driven into the World War III path. Okay? And Trump administration, I believe, is showing a front of course, the Israel relationship is important, but behind the scenes, I think there are significant negotiations. And the most important player in that negotiation is the top G MBS. Now, I'm no fan of any of these people. This is not about what I like. This is not about what I want. This is about what is happening right now. And the sovereign wealth funds that have been built across the Gulf Cooperation GCC regions is headed up by MBS, who only has a population of 35 million to service all of the largest oil resources, while America has to service 350 million. And so all of that excess oil is controlling the price of oil and the most important player in OPEC plus. So if you want to drive down the price of oil, you got to speak to Putin, but you got to speak to MBS most importantly. And so this now, given where we are, because America didn't win via its proxy in Ukraine, we're now sitting down at the table and deciding what the new world order looks like, which is very different under the Trump administration. And it is all of the regional superpowers as a result of what happened in the proxy war using Israel in the Middle East and using Ukraine in Europe. And remember, the strategic goal in a retreat is the weakening of the dollar in order to rebuild a manufacturing base, in order to be able to have an America first agenda, to strengthen, the export market and to weaken the price of imports. If you watch previous macro sections, I don't want to go deeper into that as well, which requires weakening the budget deficit, because the excessive debt was all built up based upon printing dollars, wiping out the American middle class, sending them abroad so that they come back into America and they are used in order to buy weapons, which is the apparatus of the proof of weapons network. And that required cold revolution so you could stop any progress of peace, stop any democracies and replace them with dictators so that they're easier to negotiate, like you see with Egypt right now, like you see in Saudi Arabia right now. Again, I'm not saying any of these things to judge countries. The people are different from the governments. I'm just talking about the reality of how the dollar works. This is also in order to use oil to combat the inflation that results as a part of this. There will be massive inflation from these policies, because going to isolationism is inherently inflationary, because you don't have a manufacturing base based upon a large population and the dynamics of China. And America wants to ensure that as less of the business goes to China and as much of it within its sphere of influence goes to America, and it wants to use tariffs in order to ensure that people are purchasing from America as part of their geopolitical regional power strategic goal. This requires a monetary reform. And so I believe that if the advisors are smart enough, they'll be using all this audit the Fed, audit Fort Knox, crypto policy, stablecoin policy, Bitcoin strategic reserves, to actually place a credible monetary reform as they execute a controlled demolition, because the Federal Reserve has a globalist agenda of the shareholders, which are the banks. And those banks don't care whether it's America or China. They're invested in all of it. BlackRock is hedged for everything. In fact, that's why BlackRock did the controlled demolition in collaboration with the Fed and the SEC in order to make sure that the Bitcoin ETF was approved, so that they could plan that transition as well. And they could plan that transition for their customers that want to continue pushing capital into BlackRock, which hedges across whatever world order and whatever influence is needed. That's why America simultaneously is planning to be crypto capital of the world under the Trump administration so that we can manage this soft landing as soon as it gets hostile with the Fed proof of weapons network debt-based Ponzi scheme that uses the shareholders to try and drive to war again. Okay. So I believe that the meeting is not so much about Ukraine, and it's not so much enemies sat down with each other engaging in diplomacy. It is mainly about the discussions of which division of each of the regions, what the lines look like, and who's going to be supplying the oil and gas, and who's going to get the rare earth minerals that are required to manufacture chips for artificial intelligence as well as Bitcoin mining as well. And what those lines are going to look like and what those quotas are going to look like, because remember, the central banking system has moved us to peak centralization. And these are the three key players in the so-called pretend democracies that sit underneath this power structure. Remember, I've always said the proof of weapons network has the central bank Ponzi scheme at the front, which is proof of weapons by selling weapons. And then you have intelligence agencies that are representing corporate interest rather than national security. And what America is doing is saying, let's get that. Let's reduce the budget for defense and actually do it for defense, which means using it for national security rather than protection of corporate interest. But the corporate interest has already taken over America because people like Elon Musk is more strategically important than the government, but they need to partner together. And so that's why lobby groups changes the laws to favor that, and you will get more wealth inequality under this model, but it has to be done in order to make sure that America doesn't blow up from the path that Biden and Harris could have taken us as well. Anyway, these lines are going to be drawn between informal trade finance agreements and rare earth minerals, oil and gas are going to be what they're actually negotiating. And by the way, that was exactly why the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline and why there was a war with Europe and why the ECB was a Fed first central bank and why Europe is being tricked into thinking that they're still, or Europeans anyway, by those funded by these illegitimate media networks, are thinking that they're fighting for democracy and Putin, the dictator, cannot win the war. That is designed to set up the environment that is needed, and that is why these people are meeting, I believe. Now, remember, none of them are enemies. Trump, MBS, Putin, they all respect each other. You know, the media is trying to make it out like, you can see all the narratives. You go, I don't even need to repeat the media narratives. You just follow the money, and that's what we do at Bitcoin Hard Talk. Okay. So Ukraine was a proxy war. It was an attack on Europe. It was to create oil dependency of Europe and gas dependency on America as part of this strategic move. The primary interest of America, who is sat at the table, represented by Trump, and they will have the Marco Rubios and all the others that will be negotiating it once the captains of the proof of weapons network are sat at the table. So what does America? Well, America still wants somewhat of a proof of weapons network. It doesn't want to control, a complete demolition. It still has a military industrial complex, and it still needs to make sure that there are demand for dollars, but it wants to reform the dollar. And so that needs to be done in a controlled way, as far as I see it. So they still want to make sure that there are security contracts. So if Saudi Arabia wants to purchase security from America, that will be negotiated at this table. What else have they got? Right. What they have to figure out is the future of Europe, and Europe doesn't get a seat at the table, and Zelensky doesn't get a seat at the table. And so that is why they are negotiating the future of the euro dollar. The ECB and the Fed are the ones that are able to execute whatever the mission that is decided in this as well. And Ukraine is not important to that mission, and Zelensky will just flee at the end of this. NATO is important, but America wants to make sure that the dollars and the money get into the military industrial complex. But Europe wants it to go to Germany, UK, and France and focus on Europe first. But they need to take over the retreat of America. So they need to believe that war is the option. So Europe will be saying, we're still fighting for democracy. This is a fight against evil. You'll still have all that narrative because they want to get the money and make sure it goes into the local base. America is delivering a different message. They're saying this is corrupt. Ukraine is not a democratic leader. He's a dictator. He's only got 4% support. So that message is being pushed out because they want to say, well, we're going to spend less on NATO, but the negotiation is that you're all going to spend more on military because you're still doing the war machine, the fake threat, and you're going to buy it from America. And we need strategic weapons against Europe that will be focusing on themselves if they stand against the European Central Bank policy. So what else do they need to negotiate? US needs to negotiate the future of the Middle East and the petrodollar. So remember, back in World War I, Sykes-Picot, the British Empire set up this agreement, which is to make sure you draw lines across the region and you have covert operations through MI6 in colored revolutions and funding, fake groups and then calling them ISIS and Al Qaeda and all that stuff. It was a model that we created to weaken the Soviet Union after the Soviet Union was installed in Russia by the Bolshevik Revolution during World War I, replaced Russia with the Soviet Union, installed Marxist communists, installed the Federal Reserve, replaced capitalism in America to get it to almost $40 trillion debt before it needs this reform, and benefited from the failed ideology of superior oppression and authoritarianism of communism, and saying that you're doing it to equalize for the people and profiting from both sides. And so after World War II, the apparatus of the proof of weapons network was set up. The Bank of England transitioned it over to the Fed. And then we had the petrodollar construct, which made sure the Middle East was in a constant state of war. And so they installed Israel as an outpost in order to create all of those problems and make sure that there was never peace in the Middle East, to prop up the demand for the dollar and the Kissinger petrodollar negotiations after destroying those regions. And the ones that wanted peace had to remain a dictator, fend off democracy and revolution. The only one that didn't successfully do that was Iran, because it had a revolution. And so Iran becomes the enemy because it didn't keep the dictator that originally the CIA wanted to install in the 1953 declassified operations, where they replaced the democracy with the dictator, because Shell was a company, or British Petroleum wanted to take all of Iran's oil, and Iran wanted to nationalize it. And so the people wanted that in their democracy. So they placed democracy with dictator. And then there was a revolution as a resistance against that. Anyway, so now it all makes sense. So what do you need if you are retreating from that strategy? You're basically saying, the GCC, you're now in charge. We want some of your money, your sovereign wealth. We want to do a deal. We're no longer going to destabilize the region. So what do you do with Israel and Palestine? And that needs to be resolved. So that will be figured out. Now, what did Trump do in order to strong arm before the meeting? He said, we're going to own Gaza. We know that, as you've seen from the hostage swap every week, going a bit more into the geopolitical. Let me not go there. I'll go there in the geopolitical section. But anyway, the resistance is still there. No, I'll save that for that anyway. So Trump going in, or US going in, would require, another war. Israel would have weaponized that in order to get the war with Iran. The war with Iran would have been a lot worse than Iraq and Afghanistan. And Iran is strategically important for both Russia and China. So that was the Holocaust Harris and Genocide Joe, support genocide in order to make sure that we end up in World War III and protect the violence of the petrodollar based upon Israel first strategy, which Biden was delivering with Antony Blinken lying every week, putting up their hand in United Nations, voting against peace using the veto vote, everything we've covered on previous broadcasts. Anyway, Trump wants Europe to be dependent upon US energy. That's very important. It wants to export its energy to rebalance its deficit and to have a weakening of the dollar so that it can rebuild its manufacturing base, so that it can have regional power strategically. So what that means essentially, if I were that, and again, I wouldn't engage in this because I opted out with Bitcoin, so I don't need to engage in such games. But when you follow the money, it means Europe needs to be in a continual state of believing that it's at war with Russia and it is buying weapons from America while buying energy from America. So that's what America wants. That's what it wants for Europe. The European Central Bank doesn't care about the Europeans, so they're going to sacrifice the economy, and Europe is going to get deeper and deeper into wealth inequality as a result of that, because they're not doing what is Europe first. And Europe first is what they were doing before the CIA operation. It was building its manufacturing base. It was having nuclear energy. It was taking cheap oil from Nord Stream pipeline. It was having trade with China and BRICS, which is why America waged war through a covert operation, a series of regime changes, and everything that we saw since then, which led to the end of the negotiations because Russia resisted it and won. Now, Trump also wants energy prices down to combat the inflation that will be created from this policy. So that requires, and what does that mean? Because he needs domestic popularity. Eggs are going to all-time high prices. That creates negativity. Trump is saying, don't worry, this is a temporary measure, but everything is inflationary. And you've got artificial intelligence, which is deflationary through unemployment. And so you need to transition to monetary reform so that you can have, for example, the $5,000 dividend to all citizens, which is a form of universal basic income, which will probably be delivered on a stable coin because they are choosing stablecoin technocracy and data over Federal Reserve proof of weapons. And that fight will continue. That friction will probably still be there as well. But Trump also wants access to Ukraine because Ukraine has the rare earth minerals that is required in order to power this artificial intelligence and the semiconductor chips, so that Taiwan doesn't reunify so China doesn't reunify with Taiwan, which China doesn't want to do, but the Biden administration was pushing for that in order to profit from World War III as well on the previous pass. So it wants Europe to essentially be dependent upon weapons from the US, and it wants Europe to cut off its trade from China, because America wants to compete with China as much as possible, even though that's hugely inflationary for Europe when it needs deflation. And Trump will want his family to essentially have real estate transactions as a result of developing Gaza, because he's got his son-in-law has a fund with Kushner that took the money from the GCC and Saudi Arabia in order to invest in all of this redevelopment. So Trump will want real estate to be deployed in both Ukraine and Gaza so he can personally benefit. And on the crypto side, he's created all the tools and apparatus for stable coins, for Bitcoin ETFs, for social media based upon TradFi, meme coins, stable coins, World Liberty financial tokens, governance token, DeFi platform. So he's setting up everything to profit from this transition as well. And he wants to make sure that his family get a cut of everything. But he doesn't want ownership. He doesn't want to have troops in Ukraine and doesn't want to have troops in America. And he doesn't want to own Gaza because that would be the very same thing that props up the wartime model. And we are moving away from that model because the rules have been set. And I believe that the new world order is being set. And that's just a liability. Owning Gaza means you have the liability of protecting it. Owning Ukraine means you have the liability of protecting it. And Russia doesn't want that. Russia wants to be, a conduit between BRICS, a good relationship with America, and whatever it negotiates in this new world order with its relationship with Europe. Russia, on the other hand, wants US containment because he knows that he's got a good relationship with Trump, but what happens after Trump? Is the global controllers of finance going to move to the old model and launch colored revolutions, expand NATO, and try and remove the security of the agreement that led to peace of the post-Cold War era and try and prop up the dollar again and do all the same things that led us to World War III? And so he wants to make sure that doesn't happen. So he needs some de-dollarization. He needs the BRIC mission to happen. Now, Trump has to posture. He needs to say 100% tariffs on anyone that comes up against the dollar. I'm going to own the whole of Gaza. He needs to posture this in order to deliver this, because the actual negotiation is going to be isolationism and a retreat of America to regional power in the end, and a weakening of the dollar in order to try and make that happen. Why? Because he's a real estate guy. So he wants interest rates down on the long 10, on the long side, because also America needs to renegotiate all of this debt. It said it's not going to refinance. It says it is going to refinance. It's not going to expire any of the debt because that's part of the controlled transition as well. And so basically, America's bargaining chips in this whole setting of the world order is obviously sanctions, which is what Russia wants to be removed from, because Russia wants to trade. It wants and also it wants the trade policy with China to be set in a way where it's not destabilizing, but America gets as much of it as it can. And Russia is the key, and Iran is the key to providing that oil and gas to China and having global South BRICS corridors. And Europe's kind of caught in the middle, which is why if Europe doesn't figure out how to be independent and sovereign and move away from the ECB proof of weapons network, it will get destroyed in this whole process. So Europe is set to be the loser. And that's why Europe's not at the table. And that's why Zelensky's not at the table. And also Xi Jinping is the competing power. So he's not at the table. And remember, because of these sanctions, India became an oil exporter where it was selling the oil to Europe from Russia and getting a clip in between. And Modi has already sat down at the White House and met with Trump and decided what their role in BRICS is going to be. So what does this actually mean? What is his negotiation chip as well? Well, the negotiation chip as well is removing US military support for Israel, which was the apparatus of preventing peace in the Middle East, and making Israel get along with its neighbors and normalize with its neighbors rather than being an outpost of America in order to, create all the problems that are happening, which then requires a two-state solution. So that is part of the negotiation as well. What else has America got in its negotiation chips? Well, it's got the military posturing that it's going to have with Iran. Is it going to allow Israel to target the military nuclear bases, which is what Israel wants in order to be the superpower in the region? But the GCC is the superpower. And I believe that the New World Order is preventing Israel becoming the superpower and ensuring that the GCC is the superpower and normalizing and making Israel actually be a natural two-state rather than, covert operations in order to create violence across the region and make the justification of the fake war on terror and the clean break plan, which Netanyahu wrote, that got America into all of these forever wars that wiped out middle-class America, created inflation, and got the government $36 trillion into debt that is now being exposed as complete crime, criminality, propping up crime networks, and everything in between that we're seeing right now as a result of the US aid stuff. So Russia wants control over its part of Ukraine, and it has its current occupation. And America sacrificed 1 million Ukrainian soldiers to achieve its goal and make sure that Russia and Europe weren't pushed together in between with China, so that it has some more power into this negotiation. And now it has those negotiations through the sanctions and various other stuff. Now, what does Russia want? Well, Russia wants to actually open up those pipelines and sell some gas to Europe. And so they'll be negotiating. What is the split? Remember, Putin and Trump are sat around, and MBS is sat around, and they're all friends essentially saying, what's the new world order? What do we need? So you get more of a percentage there. You get less of a percentage there. You get more of a percentage there. If you do that, you give me X percent there, then we'll get Israel to normalize and stop and give a two-state solution. And we'll make sure that you get this amount of rare earths, and you own this amount of land. And Trump, you get this deal. And Saudi, you get to invest this money in this AI. And then you get this rare earth. And you get to do that business with China. But you need to make sure that not too much of that is empowering China. And America gets to negotiate down this route. And that is the new world order of 2025. We are witnessing in real time that negotiation. Russia wants sanctions to be lifted. And so you'll see when we do the geopolitical side, there's some narrative around that. Remember, don't listen to what the politicians say. Listen to the money and follow the money, and you'll stop being fooled so much. And then you can position yourself and recognize the power of Bitcoin in this whole restructuring of the new world order that we are witnessing in real time together. So Russia wants all of its businesses to be opened up. It wants all of the Russian companies to be able to work with different regions. It wants BRICS. It wants its reserves returned, but that's their chip. You return our $350 billion, but we'll spend it as allowed or as negotiated in our agreement, while Russia uses that to rebuild its strategic reserves and potentially have a BRICS Bitcoin integration. All of the things that can happen when you open up the possibilities now that we have auditable, transportable, and if you can get the Lightning Network stablecoin going, this could work incredibly well for the regions that want to adopt this strategy and beta test it too. So Russia wants the removals of sanctions. I believe as part of the negotiation, it will be allow a new BRICS currency eventually. I don't think it will come immediately. They'll be posturing around that. And I think that's an opportunity. And what does Saudi Arabia want? Well, Saudi Arabia wants continued access to the Europe energy market with the GCC. So they need to negotiate. Europe, you don't get any say. You get that amount from Saudi, you get that amount from Russia, and you get that amount from America. Saudi also wants Russia commitment to BRICS, because Saudi knows that if it has a defense or security contract with America, then it needs to protect that it doesn't have full dependency. So it wants to split the petrodollar, and you can control. Saudi can now be the controller of not only the oil price, but also the balance between BRICS and America, and ensure that it can control that balance if any of those regional powers get too out of whack. And it can then ensure that it doesn't have covert regime change, and it can secure itself. And therefore, what else does it want? It needs to prevent a revolution of its people. So if you watched last week, Egypt is having almost a revolution. They started deploying military to make sure it's not going the wrong way, because Trump was saying he's going to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Jordan, the same. Jordan went and visited Trump, and he gave diplomatic gesture, but he didn't bow down to Trump. He said the king of Jordan said, we'll make sure that 2,000 Palestinians with critical cancer and illness are allowed into Jordan to get the healthcare they need, which he was doing already. But he wanted to show a diplomatic posture because Trump put him on national TV and wanted to see what he could get him to agree to. But he said, without saying it, that Egypt has got a plan and it doesn't involve ethnic cleansing, but you get to posture with Israel, make them think that they're about to have America occupying Gaza and the Palestinians are going to be ethnically cleansed. And so he's going for the worst situation so that when he sits down with Saudi Arabia, he can say, okay, well, we won't do that. We'll give you a two-state solution and we'll give you the security that you need in order to contain Israel. And they can just be part of GCC normalization. I get to put my hand up saying I created world peace. And if he pulls this off, he damn deserves it. And the Abraham Accords is back on, but it's not the fake Biden one that was going to lead to the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians that he was covering up on. And a movement towards World War II because Saudi can't normalize. Because remember, to prevent a revolution, what happened with Iran, they need to believe that Saudi is giving the Palestinian cause, which is an important Muslim cause. And the Egyptians need to believe that. And the Jordanians need to believe that as well. Whereas the Biden Holocaust, Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris were making that happen. They were trying to push for that to happen, which would have been a revolution. And then they would have installed their implants. And then Israel would have been given nuclear power. And then America would have had troops. And then they would have had to go to war with Iran. And then Russia and China would have had to protect it. They would have to reunify. And we'd end up destroying the entire world, all because no two-state solution is given. So what is the promise that Saudi wants? Saudi wants no more interference from the CIA, no more interference from MI6. We want real peace in the Middle East, and the GCC wants to be the superpower, and we want governance over our region, and we have to have a two-state solution. So we will control Israel, and you will stop covert operations in order to topple the region. We want a solution for Syria. We want a solution for Iraq. We want the removal of occupations of all the oil, all of the wheat. And we want to take care of our destiny so that we can optimize peace in the region rather than outside interference. And in order to achieve that, Saudi Arabia wants a security deal, and it wants to be a competing, legitimate nuclear power, because at the moment, only Israel has its covert, illegal nuclear powers. So it needs to be competing with that in order to contain Israel. While Netanyahu has all these public displays saying that we're going to take over Gaza and we're going to ethnically cleanse, but that's the negotiation chip. Now, it's very important to America that EU doesn't get destroyed. So it needs to be destabilized and weak, and it needs to buy America, which is why the ECB is doing the Fed first policy. But it can't be destroyed. So they need to figure out how it actually gets some cheap gas from Russia and is able to work with some in China, but it wants to use all its negotiation chips to make sure as much of that comes to America so it can be the superpower in its region. And Europe was the pawn. Europe, you got checkmated, you lost. That's why your economies are destroyed. That's why Germany's in recession. And that's why you as Muppets are still following the USAID propaganda narrative in your media, saying that we're trying to fight a dictator and we're trying to fight for democracy. I am sorry this death had to happen. It is disgusting. It is immoral. But that was the old model of the euro dollar and petrodollar that Americans are being exposed right now, saying, God damn it. There was blood on our hands all along. And some people, because this wasn't the American people, some people are still holding on to that old narrative because it's too hard to believe that everything was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. And hundreds of millions had to die for the proof of weapons network. And all of this lies had to be told. But now we're in a moment of truth. And the reason I'm fairly bullish, but very skeptical, is that I think it makes economic sense for everybody right now. And I think Bitcoin can deliver the proof of work that all of these countries need in order to remain a level of sovereign independence to fight off the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund and have a resistance against that as well in these currency wars. So my forecast based upon all of this in the macro section, US will drop support for Ukraine, and that already happened. But EU will continue to keep support for Ukraine because that is the destabilizing force that America needs, and that is what will be negotiated. And we ain't got any strong, independent, sovereign leadership across Europe because they're the donkeys that fell for this whole thing, and they're still falling for it because Keir Starmer and Macron from France, they're all going to the White House tomorrow, and they'll be told how it is. And what will they do? They'll say, F you, America, we're going to support the military-industrial complex, and we're going to destroy our economy for the European Central Bank. I'll show you. And then Putin, MBS, and Trump will set the new world order at 2025. And unless Europe resists against it, which they won't, because the leadership is too weak, too late, they'll end up losing. And the sanctions will be lifted to help, grease the wheel, make sure the money is released. And remember, some of the money that was sanctioned is in Europe, some of it's in America. So they'll be using that as the bargaining chips in the negotiations. America, what do they want? They probably want some of this money to go to US contractors to rebuild the war zones. And Trump wants to make a shitload of money out of it as well. So he wants to personally invest. And companies like Palantir will build a artificial intelligence surveillance state. And all of the companies across America, the military will provide the new artificial intelligence, and America will invest in that, and they will double down, recognizing we just need to build surveillance state as a regional superpower. And so we'll put all of that money and the savings that come in into the technology companies that will benefit from all of these contracts. Let's build Stargate. And that's why Elon paid, in order to make sure that he's on top of that network as well. So America wants to rebuild the war zones. Now, remember, BlackRock was the largest beneficiary. In previous episodes, we talked about how they got the securitized loans, and Britain bet its whole economy and restructured with the IMF in order to support this. They gambled their whole economy on this. They need to figure that out because, unfortunately, the regions have been determined, and this could be disastrous for the UK because Keir Starmer is an implant. Remember, he tried to take out Julian Assange with the fake sex scandal in order to prevent Israel being exposed through WikiLeaks, where we get all of these documents where you can fact check everything I'm saying. That helps me follow the money with the real stuff. What does MBS want? MBS also wants oil prices stabilized to be the controller of the oil price, so that he can have the leverage between the BRICS, the amount of the oil that's used for BRICS and the amount that's used for America. That's why I think the US will allow BRICS to expand. It's just posturing on terms of the tariffs. Behind the scenes, they'll keep it fragmented. They don't want it to get too much power, but because Russia won the war, they have to retreat. And that's why they're no longer the global hegemon. Everything we are experiencing is a win-win because we no longer need death, destruction, and violence to prop up the dollar, as long as it can be restructured, and we'll keep carrying that. I believe after this, Saudi will stay aligned with both America and BRICS through security and trade. And I think the GCC will be in charge of reconstructing Gaza. And it will really be Saudi and Egypt that will have the basically major say on how it is rebuilt, what the two-state solution is, and how you'll keep Israel in check now that America is retreating in order to make it normalized as well, rather than sabotaging every two-state solution and using like Epstein blackmail networks where Israel took over Bill Clinton to prevent this happening, and make sure that peace didn't happen. You have the Oslo Accords, and then you had the sabotaging and the assassinations that happened within Egypt when it got close. Sorry, not within Egypt. That happened within Israel when one of the presidents of Israel wanted to actually move towards peace, and then it was replaced back with Netanyahu, who's propping up the proof of weapons network. Anyway, what are we seeing right now on the macro scene? Trump is dismantling the US proof of weapons network right in front of our eyes, which is what I was saying everybody needs to prepare for. And there will be forces that really don't want that to happen. America first is bad for the global forces, and the global forces control America, and the political financing through the infiltration of Israeli lobbying, which supports Zionism, is going to be a very, very complex one to manage within America, which is why you're seeing huge support and posturing, but a recognition of reality and a recognition that America couldn't have won World War III. And no one would have benefited from it. And we don't want that to happen anyway. So this is a win-win all round. I'm really hopeful that this is where we're moving. Now, there is a big problem. The longer the US proof of weapons network run by the Federal Reserve is allowed to continue, the more wealth inequality will continue. And because the large companies, and there's a debt-based monetary policy, the wealth inequality won't reverse, because you'll get the inflation driven, you'll get unemployment, and you'll get a monetary reform that can combat it. But if the Fed wins out over Treasury, you won't be able to combat it, which will lead to more wealth inequality. And so that needs to be managed as well, which is not what you have in China, because China has a state banking system, and it doesn't have a destabilizing globalist force. And so China can not have, doesn't have to invest in all of this. It can just invest in building countries rather than destroying companies with your proof of weapons network. And it doesn't have globalist infiltration. And so that will be the difference in these two models. So America needs the monetary reform. China doesn't really necessarily need it because it's already got that system. It leads to more authoritarianism. And America has its freedom of speech in exchange for a financial system that's a debt-based Ponzi scheme that's causing much wealth inequality. The Fed wiped out the middle class. That's why it's so destructive on itself. And corporate interests won. And that is the model that was set up in 1913 when the Bank of England and the European bankers installed the Federal Reserve, as we covered earlier as well. Tariffs will be the negotiation chip. And if they do get executed, then this could create more wealth inequality or less. I'll keep analyzing the economic effects through it, but it depends if it's inflationary. So all of the inflation is the forces, and tariffs may be that force, or they can be either that, but we'll cover that in different things. But I hope you're starting to understand why I believe we're only just getting started within Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is the solution for the US to have a monetary reform through Bitcoin strategic reserves and stablecoin regulations in order to fight back and create an alternative systems and independence from the Federal Reserve globalist agendas through the banking shareholders. And by setting up who can regulate away from OCC and Fed and maybe over to CFTC or SEC with a regime change, which we are experiencing right now, that is pro-America first, then you could end up fighting the forces. And that is the American struggle. And I believe if you have Bitcoin strategic reserves, which is the Cynthia Lummis bill, then I think you could get what you need, and America can be a great regional power without all of the horrible things that came along with the Federal Reserve's proof of weapons network. What does the Middle East need in order to win? It needs the efficient allocation of its natural gas so that it does not have dependency upon any type of central bank infiltration. So the Middle East regions can repurpose their energy to mining Bitcoin. It can set up a network with Bitcoin strategic reserves. It can say Saudi doesn't want to do that, but UAE does that. It can set up whatever rules it wants to set up. And it can become that intermediary between BRICS. BRICS can build using Bitcoin as the solution to the problem of how do you have a currency backed by gold and decentralization with auditability and perfect transportability, and not the problem that we're having right now where Fort Knox need auditing and the Bank of England can't deliver upon that gold. Bitcoin is the solution for that. So Middle East has a solution, US has a solution, BRICS can have a solution where it can trade and settle, and it could invest in supporting Lightning Network on stablecoins, whatever it wants to do in order to reach that infinite scalability between that. And it can set up its trade routes with no outside central bank interference. And we can have a global South, which actually has a network built upon backing gold, Bitcoin, and resources. Why not? Not saying all this is going to happen, but you see where this can go because we created the game theory of apolitical proof of work that no nation controls and is connected to nobody that can be assassinated and corrupted. This is the beauty. And what can Europe do? Europe, the one that was the weakest links with the weakest hands, that fell for the most amount of woke propaganda, that sacrificed the Europeans for the ECB Fed first policy. They can fight against the ECB if they grew a backbone and we could change the leadership and actually had something. So if Europe wants to be independent from the ECB, and it wants to be independent from US, and it wants to be independent from Russia and BRICS, it can build its strategic reserves, it can expel the European Central Bank, and it can actually focus on European people first. So if countries recognize that, if our leadership is good enough, if people can recognize this, but do we want to wait and depend upon our leaders? Hell no. We want to build our own Bitcoin strategic reserves in self-custody so that we can keep earning, as take our fiat currency, spend less than they earn, resist against debt, spend less than they earn, put the savings in Bitcoin, and own more Bitcoin each month than the previous month, because they may crash Bitcoin and we get more Bitcoin for our fiat currency. It may go parabolic as they adopt it, and therefore our influence and wealth grows in fiat terms. And we get a free ride on front running the whole system as the world recognizes the true power, and we can engage in investing in the companies that support this transition. And we don't have to wait for any of our politicians or any of our governments, because we can build strategic independence and change jurisdiction and take our wealth with us, rather than being stuck in an oppressive regime where your cash can only go to $10,000. Your gold can't come across the border, so you end up putting it in Singapore, and you're a mercy to them creating paper contracts against you. And Bitcoin solves this. Fix the money, fix the world. And if Argentina wants to do it instead of rug pulling through Libra, why not lead the world and show the world across South America and Central America, based upon the great work of Bukele that had to bow down to the IMF because they didn't have enough Bitcoin. Stop rug pulling, and we can move to a new era. And I'm excited about that. And I think we have a lot more to build and a lot more to do. But I'm not ignorant enough to rely upon these centralized politicians. That is a world that's gone more and more centralized as they try and take it to an AI central bank digital currency that rules the world eventually. Maybe. But Bitcoin is the resistance. And we need decentralized social media. And we need decentralized artificial intelligence and all that. Russia and US, in the end, the deep state, they were on the same side all along. And I'm so sorry that you fell for it. And I'm so sorry that so many had to die. But this is exactly how the proof of weapons network was designed in the first place, because the Bank of England was set up to get governments in debt perpetuity and fund wars and create violence. And it's never changed. And it's always been the same, which is why it's called the proof of weapons network. Anyway, US could get to reform the dollar if it wants to exit from that. It can use, it announced reciprocal tariffs, which is an interesting policy. And so the reciprocal tariffs is a way of normalizing across these regions and rebalancing the deficit, which is, some of the things. So I think Besant came out and he said that the US pays 350 billion in foreign taxes, and it only has 1/4 of GDP. And yet the US only received $59 billion in taxes, and the rest of the world has 3/4 of GDP. So they want to rebalance that. That's what reciprocal tariffs is about. I think it's a good strategy. I look forward to analyzing it. It levels out the playing field and it allows for this evolutionary transition rather than revolutionary violence. And they're already starting to say, how do we do semiconductors, chips within America? That was a Biden policy that's come across to Trump, and there's going to be significant investment. They need all the rare earths, which is why they need part of the land of Ukraine, which is why they want to negotiate with Greenland, which is why they want to make outrageous statements with Canada so that they can end up with the negotiations that are needed in order to have that regional superpower. Dismantle the CIA drug trafficking cartels that get in through Mexico, and all of the violence and the open border policy that was an apparatus in order to create civil war. Dismantle that, and we don't need to go down that path. And so there was announced, for example, like Intel was in talks to be split into Broadcom and TSMC, which is the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company in Taiwan. And if that can be rebuilt or done within America, then we don't need to go down the disastrous China reunification with Taiwan, and we can remain with the status quo on that side of the region because America can't afford it and would not have been able to protect. And that would have been the worst, most disastrous proxy war the world had ever seen. And I'm sure there are many companies that would have been hedging for that as well in the globalist side. So you need to watch out for that. So America is basically dismantling the proof of weapons network, reforming, looking what it looks like, building independence on chips so that it doesn't need to worry about Taiwan, building its relationship with India now that India became essentially an oil exporter to Europe based upon these sanctions. That didn't really go to plan. And because BRICS won, you need to dismantle that and retreat, which is the Trump administration. And here's what I'm hoping for. That system does not require fake wars in the Middle East. It does not require fake war on terror. And so part of what they're doing is they're dismantling the fake training camp, to Mossad operations like ISIS and CIA operations like Al-Qaeda. And if you didn't get my tweet, I did a tweet thread of exactly how that was constructed and how that was set up for the fake war and terror to weaponize religions, to create violence, and fool you into thinking half the things you probably think today based upon complete deceit, deception. So check out that on X where I did that whole tweet there. That went somewhat viral as well. Europe could free itself from the US if it wanted to by aligning with Russia and BRICS, dropping the ECB, building Bitcoin strategic reserves. That is still an option. Europe, you don't have to go sink in the ship. But you do need to retreat from America, and you do need to stop the narrative and fall for America's strategy of being a destabilized region by saying Putin is Hitler when it doesn't serve your interest, and it pretends you're fighting for democracy in order to fool people. That narrative needs to go away if you want to not sink the ship with the ECB. Interesting one around the monetary reform as well. The final parts of the macro section before we go into geopolitics. Trump confirmed that he would support Doge if it wanted to do a dividends tax return for every taxpayer. And so it wants to audit the IRS and then pay out a dividend to Americans if it can save amount from that. To me, that is the use case of a stablecoin universal basic income. And that may be the apparatus if it continues down this, Federal Reserve proof of weapons network, but it could be adoption for a stable coin. So they need the stable coin regulations and all the things that are happening after the stable coin bill. This could also, as we said earlier in the Bitcoin section, this could be done in Lightning channels if we get our network up and running for privacy, scalability as well. Low transaction fees, all of that could be done if America wants to become the crypto capital of the world. And then the world could get onto that system like SWIFT, but without the control. Everyone could follow. Could be the leader if it wants, or it could allow BRICS to do it and other countries to do it. We could get, all of the different merchants within America to basically accept payments from this stablecoin that is used to distribute, a universal basic income, and that could provide the exact apparatus that you need to have resistance against the Fed. Then you've got a resistance of full reserve banking taking on fractional reserve banking. That's all you need, and then you could have that internal struggle of evolutionary or revolutionary. The Fed will be reluctant. They announced that they're reluctant to reduce near-term rate cuts. So Jerome Powell came out and said the reason that he gave for that is because the Trump administration's trade policy has potential inflationary side effects. So they don't want to reduce rates right now. So that's kind of the Fed is waiting and seeing, doesn't think we can cut rates right now, but Trump will want potentially that to happen as well. But at the same time, the Trump is slashing government budget through Elon Musk, through the Department of Government Efficiency. And Percent came out and announced that it wants to cut that by 8% per year over 5 years. So if they achieve that goal, that is a 40% shrinkage in the US government, which is a complete resistance against the Federal Reserve, which wants as large a government as possible to execute its CIA covert regime changes and war, death, and destruction as it took over the dollar. This is kind of in line with artificial intelligence expectations. And so people need to see that. So expect slashings of budget, unemployment-based deflation as well. And essentially, they are defunding the traditional media as well. It's showing that they lied to us, that by exposing all of that, USAID was paying for all of the media and the covert regime change and the colored revolutions and the fake exporting democracy and making you feel like you're the good guys and everyone's the bad people. And we're the good people and everyone's the bad people. That was all done with taxpayer money. That all created inflation. It wiped out the middle class. If that goes, we need to, that's in line with Elon's strategy that wants the new media to be on X. And so we are moving to that social credit type of system, that universal basic income type of system, that data artificial intelligence stable coins type of system. So everybody needs to build their resistance against that by owning Bitcoin as we build more decentralized technology and resist the centralizing forces that we have moved to. Percent came out and said that he does not want to term out any debt. And so therefore it's going to repackage the debt, is not going to allow it to expire and have less debt, because remember, the dollar is debt, so you have to roll over the dollar, and so it needs to roll it over with reduced rates, so that it's cheaper for the government to borrow as it restructures that and refinances as it plans this transition as well. It said that it doesn't want to compete with the Federal Reserve on quantitative tightening. That's why it's restructuring. And it doesn't want to term out the debt. So that's an interesting justification. You can say, yeah, we don't want to compete with the Fed that, is reducing the amount of assets. So we will restructure it. And they're going to make sure they try and get the reduced rates as well. At the same time, China is just sat there weakening its currency to boost its exports. It's got its over leveraging that it had within the banking system, but it's got its state banking system and $1 trillion surplus, so it can get through all of that as well. And so that's why Xi Jinping does not have a seat at the table, because they're going to be negotiating as many deals away from China and over to America based upon the cards and the chips, but also based upon Russia having the power because it won the proxy war, and whether it can, what control Europe will have and whether it can transition to autonomy. But for now, Europe doesn't get a seat at the table. Ukraine doesn't get a seat at the table. India doesn't get a seat at the table because they're doing BRICS and Russia's doing the negotiations there. And that is the new world order that's being set up. And that is why the price of gold is going up. And gold almost has hit $3,000 as we realize that the Bank of England, the emperor, has no clothes. We eventually will audit Fort Knox, find out if the emperor has no clothes there. And there is talks around repricing the gold that Fort Knox allegedly has through top pieces of legislation. So currently, my understanding is on the balance sheet where this gold is meant to be, it prices gold at $40 rather than $3,000. So based upon the publicly disclosed amount of gold that should be audited, that's about a $10 billion asset that could essentially, based upon a $42 price, there could be almost $1 trillion asset, a $750 billion asset, depending on the price of gold, if they decided to reprice it. And then they could use that in order to sell some of the gold, buy Bitcoin through a Bitcoin strategic reserve, build the strategy, amount of developers to come into America, build out Lightning Network and the decentralized networks, as well as all the other things that they want to do, be crypto capital of the world, and build a great regional power based upon a weakening dollar and no violence. Defund the proof of weapons network. Hell yeah. Bitcoin may have created that peaceful resistance that we need, but we can opt out anyway. So gold is at almost $3,000. And remember, I debated Peter Schiff. I'll upload that to YouTube. Help me out as we get to the end of the macro section. The US can reprice their gold, buy Bitcoin, implement the Cynthia Lummis bill, and they can decline the oil rate, dollar, however it needs to do it. We're suddenly seeing China outperform the S&P as a result of this by about 20% this year as well, while Europe is in recession. So everything, when you follow the money, reflects this, that they need to drop oil prices. It needs to be stable. And that's what their negotiation to set up the new world order. Europe needs to get cheap gas, and it needs inflows into its own capital market, which requires it growing a pair and resisting against the euro dollar, while Saudi Arabia likely resists against the petrodollar in this negotiation. And the best way of Europe solving it, if you could get beyond the narrative, but then you realize, oh shit, we spent all that money comparing Putin to Hitler so that we could never normalize with Russia and allow Russia to join NATO and stabilize the region, do those contracts. You don't have to like how they govern, but recognize it was America that was the one that sacrificed those million people. And yes, Putin did do it. Say what you like, but if you emotionally negotiate, not based upon reality, more people will die. And we want to prevent more people dying. If you want that, America can finally, if it gets the negotiation right and Saudi has the right power, it can defund Israel. Israel can stop being a destabilizing, and Saudi can join BRICS, and we can have a open market for BRICS in the global south and all the things we've already covered. And we don't need these regime changes. We don't need any of that. And that is the world that I think Bitcoin could potentially give the world. That is the piece that I'd like to see. And the reason why I think this is such an interesting time in financial history. And we need to understand the proof of weapon network and not suppress any that, which is why I would like you to support me as much as possible in helping me get to 100,000 subscribers. If you weren't watching in the beginning, ever since I covered this geopolitical stuff, my subscribers just dropped off. Not because we weren't getting the subscribers, because we don't have 100,000 subscribers, and we were completely shadow banned, and the notifications stopped, various other things. So if I can get above 100,000, now that all of this has been revealed to be truth, I don't need to be a tin hat conspiracy theory. I can back this up with evidence, and I can get YouTube to do a review of my channel. In the meantime, I'll back everything up in Bitcoin Hard Talk. If you're a member of Bitcoin Hard Talk, the membership portal for free on simondixon.com, you can get a free membership, and I'll make sure I back it up all on there. You can follow me on Rumble in case YouTube takes me down during the review. But if you help me get to 100,000 subscribers, I can get that review. We're at about 91.1 at the moment. Then hopefully we can get this message out to more and more people, because I want more and more people to be protecting themselves. I want this to drain the swamp, as it were, in real times. And I want basically everything to go through the way, get rid of the blackmails. And remember, we still got the 9/11 files, the JFK files, the Epstein files. And the way to know whether we are moving towards violence before we do the geopolitical section is as follows. If in all of those revealings, you don't get Mossad being exposed and just CIA being exposed, then unfortunately, this is the Israeli lobby winning. And remember, the Israel lobby doesn't want this plan, because their version is that there is no two-state solution. They are strategically important to topple the region, and they have their nukes. And they want to make sure that American troops are deployed to Gaza so that they can be coerced into a fake war on terror 2.0 with Iran that can then go back to the Biden genocide Joe and the Holocaust Harris strategy. And so if Trump reveals all that, or the administration reveals all that, and they don't tell you about urban movers with 9/11, they don't tell you about the dancing Israelis, they don't tell you about the nuclear proliferation agreements that JFK was involved in, they don't tell you that JFK was trying to dismantle APEC funding, they don't tell you that JFK launched a resistance against the Federal Reserve by creating $4 trillion of treasury notes backed by silver. If none of that comes up, then you know that you can't rely upon the information, and they are just simply trying to blame it on the CIA to achieve that goal, but Israel is still remaining in control. And then that is the Zionist struggle, because of the control of those that are controlling Congress. And that is what needs to be resisted against, because the two-state solution is the path to peace. And we don't need to go into World War III in order to achieve it, because the petrodollar is in control by the GCC, and that requires normalization. So that, with that said, we can move into the geopolitical section, which is the final section of This Week in Bitcoin. And now, I covered a lot of geopolitics, but we're going to go through the events of this week and how they lead me to those conclusions, and so that you don't fall for the psyops that are being perpetuated through the media that is controlling the narrative to take us away from a peaceful path and over to World War III and some of those narratives by those that control the media and control the purse strings as well. Okay, so I'm going to take some water. Please do me a favor, do a like, a subscribe, a comment. If you're watching the recording, I read the comments, I'll reply to them and review them as well. And that really, really helps with the algorithm. I'm going to get my voice fresh again, and we're going to go through the final section and the geopolitics of the 2025 New World Order meeting that we're going to be having very soon.